Welcome to the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast. Join host Jimmy Young as he dives into the pulse of the cannabis industry, featuring weekly guests who break down big topics like standardization, evolving regulations, and exclusive member spotlights. Get informed, get inspired. And now, here's your host, Jimmy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Young. And this podcast would not be possible without the support of our friends in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. That would be Buds Group. Accounting Buds has morphed into Buds Group and is now a consultant in all the aspects of the cannabis industry. Plus, the Maverick PR Group out of Colorado is also a big supporter of this program, and we thank them as well. But we are so happy to be joined by a guy that I've known for practically 10 years. He's been the vice president of communications at Marino PR in New York City. His name is Jordan Isenstadt, and I'm so happy to have him on the show because he's a new member of the board of directors of the NCIA. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us here today. So excited to welcome in a new member of the board of directors of the NCIA, and a gentleman I've known since 8 years ago. He's Jordan Isenstadt from Marino PR out of New York. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being one of the OG players in my cannabis journey. I've known you a long time.
That's right. And again, I love the original story about how I asked to interview Joe Lasardi, who was the founder of Curaleaf. And then you invited me to their party in December. And when I was hovering around Joe at this party, and I said, I just want to introduce myself. My name's Jimmy Young. I used to be a sportscaster in Boston. He goes, Jimmy, I used to watch your show. And I go, well, tell Jordan Isenstadt that, will you, so I could get an interview with you? Anyway, there's a lot going on in the world, but I want to start with the board of directors, this new group of people, including one of my dear friends in the industry, Jamie Pearson, who I adore, okay? So let's talk about what the new board, working with Adam, might have in mind for how to make the NCIA a more vibrant organization. What are some of the ideas that you think you can bring to the table?
Well, first off, really excited for, where we're at in sort of policy on the federal level. We've been involved in this industry for about 9 years. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. We're talking about a lot of the same issues we were talking about 5, 6, 7 years ago, but feels like we're closer. Feels like we're slowly getting closer. I myself am a student of government. I worked for 2 state senators in New York and 2 governors in New York. And so policy for me is kind of like been the through line throughout my career. Much of the work that I've done at Marino over the last 10 years has still focused even tangentially on policy in some way, shape, or form. So to now be on the board of the National Cannabis Industry Association it's an honor. It's kind of a dream come true. I'm kind of still pinching myself a little bit, but it's really exciting. What I think is exciting about the organization, though, is that the organization has had a tremendous run. I mean, they were the first federal Cannabis Industry Association under the leadership of Aaron Smith. They were the first player. They created a lot of the conversations that we're having now. And, now I think there's an opportunity for, NCIA 2.0 or something to that effect. Sure. So there's a real opportunity for the organization now to sort of remake itself a bit, refocus a bit, especially because it's very different than it was, 15 years ago. The majority of states now have legal cannabis markets of some kind. So the goals have changed a little bit. So we're gonna be working a lot. And being on a board, by the way, is it's like a full-time job in itself. I'm early stages, but I'm seeing that there's a lot of work, but there's a lot of work to be done, and it's really important work. So I think we're gonna remake the organization. We're going to refocus the organization, and we're also going to, be a key part of advocating for the industry and making sure that these big things get done, whether that's rescheduling, safe banking. There's a lot that needs to be done with marijuana and hemp and kind of uniting the industry.
Yeah.
We're an industry that is divided, unfortunately, in many ways, whether that's among the different parts of the industry, whether it's retail, processing, cultivation, but then there's the hemp and hemp beverages. There's so much to be done, but the NCIA is uniquely positioned at the center of everything to be a key player in getting it all done. I'm going to be focusing a lot of my effort, of course, on PR, marketing, communications for the organization. So you're going to be hearing a lot from us this year. So it's an exciting time.
Good. And I'm glad that we've known each other for a long time too, because I just want to be used. I'll be perfectly honest with you. Please take advantage of my passion for the cause and this podcast, which I've really enjoyed. There was a time when I was in college and I went to Tufts University, and the mascot was the Jumbo, the elephant that P.T. Barnum gave to Tufts as their mascot back in 1856. This is what happens when you're a three-generation Jumbo. You know all the history. And I'll never forget that being the voice of the Jumbos for the basketball and the football team. So I've always been the voice of the Jumbos, the Huskies, the Bulldogs, wherever I happen to be in my career, and to be voice of cannabis, or at least in that group that's involved with that. I am 100% on board with it, and also very honored and flattered. You mentioned something right off the bat that I had just talked to Adam Rosenberg, your chairman of the board, about on the podcast I did with him. And it was that legacy, legal, and hemp, right? And how we can get the One Plant Alliance that Steve D'Angelo and Andrew D'Angelo have recognized and are trying out there to make sure that that works, because I agree 100% that what they never understood with the Farm Bill of 2018 was they legalized the plant and they gave it a legal definition. And then even Mitch McConnell admitted he screwed it up because they just wanted an industrial product, not something you could still get high from, 0.3% dry weight. Then they created a $28-32 billion industry to counter the legal industry. And it's been a mess. Let's be very honest, Jordan. But there's
a lot of issues to untangle here.
That's right. But it's enlightened a lot of people about the depth of knowledge you need to understand how this plant works with the human body and how people use it and why they use it and all this stuff. And it all still boils down to education. And that's me in my soul. I've always been a teacher and a coach in my soul, and I want to continue to do that. And I love telling people more about this plant because I've learned so much after close to almost 1,000 interviews in 8 years, Jordan, since you and I met. I mean, it's been crazy how many, and especially some of the pioneers, and now where we're at now, who are just trying to get by. But every year there's a new state. And every year there's a new state that has the same issues that every other state had when they were new. So there's another opportunity here to, again, engage with the industry and enlighten the newbies that are coming on board and how to deal with adult use. And that's where I'm at. And I give you guys credit because we've reconnected through your little, is it a venture or is it a cause or is it just a fun thing to get together on is it the first Friday every month at 4:20? Is that what
that's what we do now? Yeah.
That's the Jews and Weed Zoom call that happens. And that's kind of how we all created this. And Stu Zakem, Jordan, I don't know if you know the history I have with the Zakem family, but I mean, first of all, Stu did my first podcast in the weeds in 2018 at NECAN. Secondly, his older brother, the late Lenny Zakem, Anti-Defamation League Northeast Director for 25 years, is the reason why I left full-time sportscasting work, because I wanted to work with him. He had bone cancer at the time. I knew he wasn't going to be around that long, and I just loved the event that we were both involved with called Team Harmony. And that's kind of how, that was the history. That's the Zakem family, also from Newton, Massachusetts, which is my hometown. So let's get back to how we're going to bring this industry together under this one plant. Adam has a few ideas. I agree 100% with that is what the goal should be. And you guys are one of the few industries that are trying to get the hemp industry and the marijuana, I hate using the word, cannabis industry together. And how is that going to happen now? I mean, it's almost like because the federal government has put this ban in place, it's forcing that industry to make deals and come together with the others so that we can have one voice about this plant.
Yeah, and in a funny way, you're absolutely right. What's happened between federal prohibition, but then this weird farm bill experiment that the government is now, kind of banning, or we're closing that loophole. It
Yep.
has actually brought some of these factions closer together, or at least kind of forcing them to work together. So I think one of the first things we need to do is figure out, what we all agree on, which is probably a lot,
Right.
and or probably most things, and then figure out what we don't agree on and how can we solve for those things.
Excellent.
So, Adam, the chairman of our board,
Yep.
I feel like he's a diplomat and a peacemaker, and he's very calm, and he's got a really lovely way about him.
Yeah.
And so I think that he's going to play a big role in helping bring all these players together. And with NCIA as a part of it. NCIA is not the umbrella here. NCIA, we represent our folks. But I think that NCIA is uniquely positioned to bring all these players together. So I look, 2026 is going to be a big year, I think, for the industry. And but we have a long way to go. I will say, reminiscing, as you were doing a moment ago for a sec, my first MJ BizCon 2018,
Okay.
Chris Walsh, the editor at the time, was
Oh,
doing the
yep.
opening, and
Yep.
he was like, and this was my first BizCon. I was like immersed by the lights and the people, and I knew nobody.
Okay.
And he opened his opening remarks by saying, "We're at the first step of the first mile of a marathon."
Right.
Right. And if you know a marathon, that's 26 miles. So if we're at the first step of the first mile, we got a long way to go. Maybe we're a few steps in now, or
Yep.
half a mile in, but like
Yep.
we got a long way to go.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be done. There's so much confusion.
Right.
I really appreciate also what you just said a few minutes ago about education.
Right.
I think the NCIA can play a really big role with education, but getting over to my day job at Marino, where I do cannabis PR and marketing.
Yep.
At the end of the day, our mission is to educate people through the media, right? Through the stories of our clients.
Mhm.
And it's all about destigmatizing and normalizing cannabis. And
Right.
it's all through the stories and anecdotes, and knowledge and thought leadership of the clients that we're, fortunate to work with, which, range from farmers to processors to retailers to tech companies to ancillaries. Everyone has so much to share. But it's, we're still in that phase now where we're educating people,
Right.
and I mean, I look at my kids who are 14 and 10,
Yep.
and they're the first generation to grow up in a world with like cannabis kind of seeming normal. So
Right.
we have a generation until these knots get untangled here.
That's right. And you know how it is in America. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. I happen to think that the pie is big enough for everybody, but it does start with education, acceptance, and you keep using the word normalization. This is what my goal has always been, is to share some of those unbelievable anecdotal stories. And you and I both have, probably thousands of people have said, hey, cannabis saved my life. Cannabis changed my life. I mean, we've heard them both for 8 years. This is what it is. But explaining it and overcoming that stigma is still there every single day. Now, you're in the trenches, and I got to ask you this question as a PR guy. Is it softening at the traditional media level? Are they willing to listen and do some of the stories that you're pitching? Or are you still battling with, it's still a federally illegal substance?
It's, look, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
A few years ago, and I'm based on the East Coast, like you. So, we're in and I'm in New York, so we're in an area where it still feels like there's excitement about the industry as compared to, some of our friends in California and Colorado, where, everyone's losing money, and it's very different. There's still a lot of excitement about New York,
Yeah.
New Jersey, Massachusetts. Our markets are still growing and are still, kind of on the uptick. A few years ago, there was so much excitement when the New York Times assigns, Ashley Southall to be the New York cannabis reporter. And in New York, we had New York Cannabis Insider, and Green Market Report, may it rest in peace, was purchased by Cranes. So like
Right.
there was this sort of bubble a few years ago where it was really exciting and it felt like there were more and more people to pitch and it was really exciting. That's definitely where, I feel like where there was a roller coaster, it kind of, started to go downhill. I think we're kind of coming back up a little bit, particularly with all the federal news. There's a lot more people paying attention now in the media because the president is taking it more seriously. Also, regardless of rescheduling, CBD and other cannabinoids are now receiving much more attention.
Right.
Will is on track to be covered by Medicare. So that's a big deal in this incremental process because that's the whole thing. I mean, back to our government conversation, government's meant to work slow. As much as people hate it, it's intended to work very slow. So like it's working perfectly, I suppose, as it's supposed to, in very slow. But in terms of media, I will say that there are challenges for sure. There's still a lot of stigma. There are still certain outlets that, like the New York Post, for instance,
Well, wait,
which,
hang on. The New York Times wrote this editorial a
well,
couple of
yes.
weeks ago and they had just turned over their whole editorial staff. And needless to say, they've been getting slammed. It was our lead story, the reaction to the industry. And in fact, that's how I met our mutual friend, Mr. Ambrosino, from New York, because he did a great kind of counter editorial in LinkedIn. And that's how I reached out to him. But I don't want to make this into a government or a politics thing, Jordan, but I will say this. The checks and balances of our government have been tested in the last year.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
can we say that? I think we could both agree on that.
I think
And
we could
I'm going to give President Trump credit. I do, because he is the first president in my lifetime, okay, that actually did something positive and recognized that what Richard Nixon did in 1970 was wrong. And the fact that Richard Nixon is still haunting me to this day, because he influenced my childhood too. I was pretty much a radical 12-year-old, okay, anti-war at the time, because I had an older brother who I loved, and I did not want him to get drafted in a war that I just didn't think made much sense. And I don't want to get into where we are now, okay, because we are going through some similar things. But I give President Trump credit, and I understand how it all happened with Howard Kessler and the Commonwealth Project whispering in his ear, I use it, and I was able to get rid of my cancer because of it. That is a huge thing in this particular day and age. All right. But back to where we're at as an industry. And one of the things that is bothering me is, why do you think people are leaving the cannabis industry right now? Have they reached their limit? And I can totally relate to this. How are you seeing that?
It's exhausting. One of the things that people in cannabis often say is that, cannabis years are like dog years
Right.
and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
and it's true. The grind in cannabis is unlike anything that I've ever experienced. I'm close to a decade in the industry at this point, but prior to that, I worked in government, I worked in nonprofit, I worked for many political campaigns. I mean, I've grinded before. When you do campaigns, you're practically working 24/7 to get somebody elected. But cannabis it's this slow churn kind of grind. You put your all into it. Most people in this industry are also believers,
Mhm.
which I think changes it a little bit as compared to a, kind of a traditional corporate job or whatever the
Right.
case may be. But there has been a trend lately. You're absolutely right. And there was that article recently,
Yep.
about with all these people, like Lilac and, others that are beloved in
Right.
the industry, that just can't take it anymore. I
Right.
think I think partially it's a combo of work-life balance. I think it's very challenging to not have this industry which requires, evening events and dinners and weekend events and travel. It does suck a lot out of you. I think a lot of the people that are leaving also were personally invested and lost money, thought that by now they would have made that money up, and they have not.
Right.
And there is no timeline for when that may change. I mean, I've been hearing for years that once rescheduling happens, suddenly there's going to be all this money for PR and marketing. I'm still waiting.
Right.
I'm still waiting for the floodgates to open. And by the way, when not if rescheduling, when rescheduling happens, I don't necessarily know if the floodgates are immediately going to open, because this has been a slow burn in this industry. So I think a lot of people just got tired of it. They
Right.
just got tired of it, and they just had to make a change. And I respect that.
Yeah, I call it cannabis standard time. One step forward, two steps backward. It's been going on even now. We went through the green rush where everybody tried to get in early, right? And then everything was good. Oh my God, we're going to legalize it in the next year or two. That didn't happen. Okay. The Democrats had their chance. It didn't happen. They couldn't get it across. They couldn't even get it started. That being said, now we're dealing with reality of 2026. And again, even President Trump's strong arming his staff and his people like Pam Bondi and the DEA, nothing has happened since what Jamie Pearson called I call it the dog and pony show, and she called it a big nothing burger, which I still maintain is one of the greatest quotes of all time. And yet it happened. It happened in my lifetime. I saw him say that cannabis has medicinal qualities, or rather CBD, a cannabinoid in that plant, has medicinal qualities. That was a big win, I think, for the industry. But again, nothing has happened. And yet you go down the street and you run into people, Jordan. How many people have come up to you and said, well, President Trump just legalized cannabis, right? I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah. No, the average American, unfortunately, it's very complicated. But yeah, it seems like it's legal now, right? It's legal.
Right.
But also, look, I mean, part of the reason that there's so much confusion is because of all the intoxicating hemp products that are out there as well. And that also created a lot of confusion, because I had a lot of people come up to me a couple of years ago. They were like, oh, didn't you see the weed store that opens up? Like, you can buy anything you want. And so I checked it out, and it was not a dispensary. It was a CBD store, and they were selling THCA or whatever it was.
Yep.
And, there's a lot of confusion out here. And that goes back to the education.
Right.
It all goes back to the education.
And it's a complicated plan. It really is. One last question. I do want to ask you about the prohibitionist movement over the last couple of years has gained momentum. And you know what's going on in Massachusetts, where they have a ballot question initiative that they're trying to shut down the adult use market. And the good news is we just reported on the fact that I think it was UNH actually did a poll and found that 63% of the people are going to vote against this for sure. But there's another 17% who are like, I'm still on the fence or whatever. Basically, 80% are basically saying we don't want to have this adult use market go away. And that would be the greatest thing, I think, to stop this, because you're usurping democracy. Citizens need an opportunity to get signatures onto a ballot. They have to go, look at poor Florida and Smart and Safe Florida, trying so hard to just get adult use into that state. And yet they flourished as a medical state, which is another reason why President Trump said, I think Florida has got it right. Well, that may be true, President Trump, but the reality hit as soon as you did your little dog and pony show, and nothing has happened. So again, Jordan, are you concerned about the prohibitionist effort? Because it does seem to be they've been galvanized over the last year or two.
I think that this is the last gasp of the prohibitionist movement.
Good.
I think that they're Massachusetts is the one that's gotten the most kind of coverage, but I know there was a movement in Arizona, I believe, as well as Maine, similar sorts of things and similar kinds of tactics, right? Like tricky phrasing to get people to sign the petition, to even get it on the ballot. And a lot of people said that they didn't know what they were signing, or they didn't mean to sign it. So taking advantage of a citizenry that doesn't necessarily understand all of these mechanics. And it's what do they say? Like the dawn is darkest before the something like that. Like
Yeah. Yep.
it's the darkest before the light comes out. And so
Yep.
I think that what you're seeing is kind of this last attempt to get some state to move in the other direction, because I mean, as long as I've been in the industry, it's like you said, every year it's another state, 2 states, 4 states, 5 states coming online, or a medical program coming online, or a hemp program coming online. Virtually every state has some form of legal cannabis or cannabinoids or something.
Right.
And so this is an attempt to just turn back the clock, and they're going to fail. It's really a question of how big is the fail.
Right.
And to your point, I think it's really important that we have a really resounding
Yep.
defeat,
Yep.
because if it's like 60-40, that almost feels like they won,
I agree.
even though they didn't.
It's got to be 80-20. It's got to
Gotta
be
be
80-20.
80-20.
That's what I'm looking for. That's our goal. And there's a meeting in a couple of weeks here in Massachusetts with the counter group to fight that as we get closer to the actual election. Jordan Isenstadt, look, we could have talked for hours, which I really enjoyed. But
I have to do a sequel.
That's right. I so appreciate you taking the time out. Congrats on being named to the board of directors of the NCIA. I'm here for you guys to take advantage. Whatever you need me to do, happy to do it. And I appreciate you taking the time for our Voice of Cannabis podcast this week.
Thank you.
We focus solely on the cannabis space. The cannabis is not just another item that we've put on our website and said, oh, we're in cannabis. We do cannabis and cannabis only, and we focus on cannabis day in and day out. So with Buds Group, we're going to not only work with you and give you advice, we're going to help see your project through to completion. And you're going to find at the end of the day, it'll be a fraction of a cost of working with a larger firm, because our executives are focused just on cannabis and we run lean.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.